If you are an independent artist trying to figure out the steps you need to take to protect, release, and collect royalties on your music creations, listen up, because music attorney Cassandra Spangler is going to break it down for us. The information provided in this video is for informational purposes only, and not for the purpose of providing legal advice. You should contact an attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular issue or problem. Hey, Cassandra, we are back again. How are you?
Hi, Janae. Good. How are you? It's now warm weather. I think the last time we did this, it was cold out still. So great to talk to you.
Yeah, it might have been cold where you are, but it is always sunny in Florida.
True. That is true. Yes. Every episode is warm where you are, and here we get every episode we're in a different season, I feel like.
That's exactly right. But that's kind of cool. It gives you a little change every now and then instead of always being hot.
It does. Yep.
So last time that we spoke, Cassandra, you had gathered some questions from the general public, and we did introduce those questions and had a itty bitty little discussion, but then we decided we would explore those questions in more details. So here we are exploring one of the questions. And even before we do that, although I said hello to you, Cassandra, I didn't say who you are. Where are my manners?
No problem.
So, Miss Cassandra, you are a music attorney
I am.
and you're located in New York. And we have been doing this for quite some time, talking about the music industry and how independent artists can move along in their careers. And again, everybody's always so thankful, I think, for these conversations because it brings some clarity into a world that is very, very confusing. So, this episode will be no less than the others. We will bring some more clarity to the question that we have chosen out of the general public. And that question, Miss Cassandra, is?
Yes, so this question came from a gentleman named Patrick, and the question was how to win the independent game, meaning how to make it as an independent artist. What are some things you should consider, things you should set up, things you should maintain, and all of that, those types of issues that independent artists face.
Okay. And it's actually a pretty big question. And it's, like we said before we started recording, it really encompasses a lot of what we've already discussed. But like I said in the last one, always happy to review because little aha moments, I think, come out every time we have these discussions.
Yep, definitely. And I think this will kind of give people an overview. You could even, as you're listening, follow along and maybe create a little checklist for yourself of things that you want to get done as an independent artist. And then you'll find that Janae and I have done prior talks on each one of these items on your checklist in greater detail. So, as you go through the different items and the different steps, you can head back to Janae's channel and find those past talks that we've had in greater detail for each of those different items on the checklist.
And I love the idea of a checklist. That's awesome.
Yeah, it gets overwhelming sometimes for people that are just starting, or even if they've been around for a while and sort of never set things up from a business and a legal standpoint. It can get overwhelming. So what I would suggest if you fall into that category and you're listening, just break it down step by step, take it one step at a time. It also helps with the budget because, most people don't have the budget to do everything all at once. So you can break it down into steps and then set aside money for each step as you go.
Fabulous. All right. So lead us to step number 1.
Sure. So I would say the first thing you want to do, and again, even if you've been creating music for a long time and you never did any of those things, don't panic. These are all things that can be done, and then everything can be set up the right way moving forward. So whether you're brand new and you haven't released a single song yet, or whether you've been releasing music casually for years, I would say the first step that you should do is to set up some type of a business entity. It can be an LLC. Most people, especially if it's just going to be one owner or a couple of owners, LLCs can be easier for people to work with. But you could also do a corporation instead. But either way, you want to set up some type of a formal business entity that you can use to do business through. And Janae and I have spoken on this in a prior talk in much greater detail. So I'll just kind of give you the overview today for your checklist, but that I would say should be the first step. And you may even at some point want to set up multiple entities if start to become successful in your career as an artist. You may want to set up one LLC or corporation for your music, your recordings, which would be basically like your own record label. And then you may want to set up a separate one for your publishing, a third one for your touring, and a fourth one for merchandise. But that does not have to be, you don't have to get overwhelmed. You don't have to do that all immediately. You can start with one. And then as you start to generate a lot of income, you may at that point want to separate things out. And the main benefit of doing that is it helps to limit your liability. So setting up an LLC and doing business through the LLC or the corporation, as long as you keep everything separate, it protects your personal assets. So if you own a home in your personal name, or if you have a 9-to-5 job and you're earning a salary separate from your music, all of those things are personal assets. And this way, by setting up an LLC, you can protect any liability that you incur through your music. You can protect your personal assets from that.
Okay. And this is ideal, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not mandatory that, oh, you can't do anything in the music industry if you don't do this first. It's just ideally.
Right. Yeah. There's no legal requirement or anything like that. Actually, for really any of these things that we'll talk about today, none of them are required. It's just sort of the best practice. And again, if you don't have the budget to do it immediately, don't freak out. Just make a checklist. Note that it's something that you want to do at some point, as soon as you're able to do it.
There we go. Okay. The revisit list.
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay, so that I would say should be done first. And the reason being is that it makes the rest of the steps easier, because a lot of the other steps you'll want to do through your LLC or your corporation. So not impossible to do the corporation or the LLC later. It just makes things more complicated, because then you have to transfer things over from your personal name to your business. But it certainly can be done. But I would say that should be the first step. And then the next step would be registering all of your intellectual property. So registering the copyrights in your music. And that one would be sort of ongoing. As you create new music, before you're getting ready to release it, you want to make sure you've registered the copyrights. And then also registering the trademark in your stage name and any other type of brand names or logos that you're using. Those I would recommend be step 2. And if you have already set up your LLC or your corporation, you may want to think about registering your copyrights and your trademarks in the name of your company.
Oh, okay.
And both of those items, copyrights and trademarks, again, Janae and I have done prior talks on those in much greater detail. So once you get ready for that step, you can go back and take a listen to those and get a better understanding of exactly what a copyright protects, what a trademark protects, and how to go about registering those things.
So if you have your LLC and then you register the copyright for a music, it should be registered in the name of the LLC versus your personal name?
It can be. So I would recommend that people consult with an attorney to discuss whether it makes sense to do that for you. But it can be. And the same thing with the trademark. I mean, especially if the company is the one that's using the name, or you're selling all of your music through your company, then you would want your company to own your trademark.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
And also, kind of along the same lines, again, I would recommend you speak with an attorney, because you may need to have a document drafted transferring ownership from yourself as an individual to your company. before you register things in the name of your company.
Okay.
All right. So, sort of related to that second step, which again, the second step would be registering your intellectual property. You want to make sure that you have a system in place to not only register those items, but monitor them. So, for example, if you've registered your trademark, you want to try to, whether you're hiring someone to do it or you're doing it yourself, but you want to make sure you're not allowing people to infringe on your copyrights and infringe on your trademarks, meaning they're using these items without your permission. Because if people are doing that and you let it go, it can kind of weaken the protection. So first you want to register them, and then second you want to keep an eye out, and if you see that someone is using your trademark or using your copyrights, you would want to, and this is something else I would recommend be done through an attorney, but you want to have, a letter sent to them or some other process that you're doing to get them to stop infringing on those intellectual property rights.
Okay. And what kind of attorney, Cassandra, would you go with? I mean, besides just a music attorney, but we've discussed before that music attorneys do specialize in different areas of the law.
Yes, so you could use a music attorney, entertainment attorney, or there are also attorneys who specifically handle copyrights or specifically handle trademarks.
Okay.
All right, so that would be the second step. The third step I would say would be to sign up with a what is called a performing rights organization, or a PRO for short. And in the United States, the two biggest PROs are ASCAP, and BMI. And they both do exactly the same thing, but you can only register with one or the other. And what they will do is help you to collect performance royalties on the publishing side. And I believe we've also spoken about this in a prior talk, but whenever you write a song, there are certain royalties that are earned every time it's played on a streaming service or YouTube or in a live venue or on the radio. There are what is called public performance royalties that are paid and owed to the writers and the publishers of those songs. But the only way to collect those royalties is to register with one of these PROs, whether it's ASCAP or BMI, and set up an account for yourself. And then also make sure as you're releasing new music that you're registering that new music on there as well.
Exactly. Okay.
And related to that, you also want to make sure to set up an account with Sound Exchange. And Sound Exchange collects a different type of royalty. Sound Exchange collects on the sound recording side. So these PROs are on the publishing side. Sound Exchange is on the sound recording side, and they collect performance royalties for digital and satellite radio. So if your music is getting played on Sirius XM or some other digital radio, there are royalties that are paid to you as the artist. And the only way to collect those is to register with Sound Exchange and to make sure that once you've set up your Sound Exchange account, which I believe is free to do, you then have to make sure you continually update it as you release new music.
Right. Yes. Yes. And yeah, Sound Exchange is free. I don't recall ever paying for it. As well as the PROs.
Yes, the PROs actually you have to pay to set up an account. Well, it depends.
Oh,
So BMI, I believe, is free for writers, and then they'll charge you to set up a publisher account. ASCAP, I believe, charges a fee for both.
oh, wow. Okay, so maybe that's why I'm thinking it's free because I'm with BMI as a writer,
Yep.
and my publishing is just automatic. I don't have a separate publishing account.
Oh, okay. Yep. So then in that case, it probably was free to set it up.
Okay, see that? Learned that. I had no idea that you had to pay for ASCAP.
Yep. Yeah, it kind of, I think last time I checked, ASCAP was $50 for the writer account and $50 for the publisher account, whereas BMI was free for the writer account and $250 for the publisher account. So it kind of depends on whether you're planning to set up both types of accounts, in which case ASCAP may be a little bit less expensive. But It's totally up to you. They're both, very similar. So I would suggest people kind of check out their websites, read reviews, and see which one you're more comfortable with.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So then the next step, and this one again, it definitely would recommend that you work with an attorney, with a music attorney on this step, which is clearing all the music. And what that means, you may have, if you're out there listening, you may have heard this phrase, getting something cleared. What that means is that you have taken care of all the paperwork for all the different elements of the music and of the release before you release it. So if you are collaborating with anybody, whether it's a co-writer or a featured artist or a producer or some type of background musician, all of those people have contributed different elements which need to be cleared before you can legally release it. So the way that that's done is through contracts. So you want to make sure you have written agreements in place with all of these collaborators specifying who owns what, who's going to be the one to release the music, how the income is getting split up, how the publishing's getting split up, if anyone's getting royalties or anyone's getting any sort of upfront payment. All of that needs to be spelled out in writing. And this will really protect you later on. A lot of times people think, oh, this is just, a casual project. We're all friends. Let's go ahead and release it. It's not going to make any money. And then suddenly, which happens more and more often nowadays, something may go viral overnight unexpectedly. And now suddenly it is generating a whole lot of money, and there were no agreements as far as how that's going to be split up. So that's definitely a very important step in the process, and I would not skip past it. You definitely want to make sure anyone you're collaborating with, and that includes not just on the recordings, but also whoever created the cover art. If there's a photographer, if there is a graphic designer, all of those people, you want to make sure you have in writing who owns that intellectual property and how things are getting split up.
Yeah. And that can be quite overwhelming. And I would think that if nothing else, that is absolutely when you want to get an attorney involved.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. You don't want to try to do it on your own, and you want to try to do it sooner rather than later, because you don't want a situation where you've spent money creating this music and you've paid for the studio and you've paid to have it mixed and mastered. And then suddenly after the fact, you're getting ready to release it and you get into a dispute with someone who collaborated with you as far as, how things are going to be split up, which happens a lot, unfortunately. So you want to try to take care of these things sooner rather than later. And you definitely want to have an attorney do it for you rather than trying to draft these agreements or find something online. You want to really make sure you know what it is and what people are signing.
Right. And not to belabor it, but it is so, so very important. I love what you said about, yeah, you're all friends and you're doing this thing together and it's for fun. But once real money gets involved, things change.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't care if it's your best friend that you're working with, having a contract in place is important. But also, with the contract, it outlines who's responsible for what, so you can refer back to it and say, "Oh, wait, you were supposed to do this," or I was supposed to do this, and it didn't get done, which I think is also really, really helpful.
Definitely. Yep, definitely. And it also helps to protect you in case, someone you're collaborating with maybe copied someone else's music and you didn't even know about it. Those are the types of things that would also be addressed in those contracts. So, it's really, really important. I don't know if any step is more important than the others, but it certainly is a very, very important step that you don't want to skip past. So once you've done all that, I mean, that will really get you set up with a good legal and business framework. So again, setting up an LLC or a corporation, registering your copyrights, registering your trademarks, getting set up with a PRO and with Sound Exchange, and then registering your music with those organizations and getting all the contracts drafted and signed. Once you've done all that, you're set to go as far as releasing things, because now you've protected yourself legally, you've made sure everyone's on the same page, you've registered everything so that you'll be sure to collect all these different types of royalties. So you'll really have a good solid foundation once you've done those things. And then it really comes down to coming up with a release plan and coming up with marketing and promotion, which are sort of not my fortes, but that would be the next phase of the process, and then putting the music out. And then you just want to make sure moving forward that you kind of go through the same process each time. You don't need to set up a new LLC for every album or anything like that, but you do want to make sure you're keeping the registrations up to date as you're releasing new music. You want to make sure you're doing the paperwork with your collaborators every time.
Now, all of these steps, and I don't even know if we're done with all the steps, but so far, you could work with an attorney on each one of these things, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Because yes, some of it is rather overwhelming. The other thing is the LLC part is huge, and the trademark part as well. Probably should not do that without an attorney as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I definitely would not recommend trying to register the trademark on your own because it gets very technical and it's also not cheap. The filing fees are, several $100s. So, I've seen people try to do it themselves and they just use the wrong wording or they check the wrong box and now they lose their filing fees. So I would definitely recommend having an attorney handle that for you.
Some of the things that people really, I mean, if they wanted to, they could do it on their own by looking things up and figuring it out. Would you say the PRO work?
Yes, yeah. So you can, once you've sort of done one PRO registration, you get a sense of how it works. The only thing that's important there, again, these contracts. So if you're collaborating with people, you need to have these contracts in place before you can register with the PRO because you need to know what percentage is going to each co-writer. But if you have something where you're the only writer of all the music and all the lyrics, then it's a pretty simple process and that can definitely be done on your own. Same thing with copyrights. Copyright registration, I mean, ideally, you would have an attorney do it every time. But if it's not in your budget, it's not as technical as trademark registration is. So, especially if you're the only creator, then you can maybe have an attorney walk you through it the first time and then get a sense of how it works and then do it yourself moving forward. If there are a lot of people involved on the song, then it starts to get more complicated. But that would be another one that potentially you could learn how to do on your own.
As well as sound exchange, right?
Right. Yep.
The LLC, I think that that is something that you could potentially do on your own as well. It's a little more complicated if you go with the LLC route. But then also, on top of that, you would also need to get a bank account in that name, correct?
Correct. Yep. So once you have set up the LLC, then yeah, you would want to register with the IRS to get an employer identification number, and you would want to set up a bank account and then start doing all of your music related business through that bank account.
And again, I feel like that kind of goes both ways. You could potentially set an LLC up by yourself, or you could have either an attorney or an accountant do it.
Right. Yes. Accountants can also set up the LLC for you. I always advise people to speak to the accountant either way because I don't give tax advice. And sometimes there may be certain tax benefits or drawbacks of, for example, doing an LLC versus a corporation or something like that. So it's always a good idea if you can to speak to both your attorney and your accountant about these types of things, just to get a sense of what the different implications on each side of it may be.
Right. Did we have anything else on the checklist?
No, that's really it. And again, it can feel overwhelming, but I think if you break it down into a step-by-step list, and you can even create, a budget for yourself, a timeline for yourself, and then just move step by step. You can refer back to Janae and I's prior videos where we talk about some of these items in more detail when you get there. And, if your career starts to really take off, then that's when you can delegate some of these tasks to other people on your team, whether it's your manager, your attorney, your agent. Some of these things can be delegated out to those people at that time. But, if you're just getting started, just take it step by step. And the more times you go through the process, the more familiar you will become with it, and it'll just become like second nature at a certain point.
And it's interesting, going back to the original question, I feel like everything that you just outlined contributes to that being the case of you owning your masters and your publishing, particularly when it comes to the contract part.
Yes. So, and that's actually an interesting question, because there are pros and cons to being independent versus signing with a label. And, one of the pros, obviously, of being independent is that you have full control over everything: creative control, business decision control. You keep 100% of whatever you're earning. One of the cons is that now all of these items are your own responsibility, whereas if you're signed to a label, a lot of these things, especially the more daunting things, the label will take care of them for you. So that's one of the drawbacks. So if you're an artist who is considering should you go the independent route, or if you have an offer from a label and you're wondering what you should do, I think one thing you should be realistic about is whether you want to take on all of these responsibilities. Again, there can be a very big payout from doing it this way, but then there are also artists who just solely want to focus on creating and don't want to worry about these things. And if that's you, and if you're not willing to hire people to take care of some of these things for you, then you may be better off going with a label. So that is one of the considerations. And then, of course, if you're independent, that means you own your own masters, you own the recordings, the copyrights in the recordings. And whereas if you're with a label, most of the time the label would own those masters.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how much work you want to put into it. It's not easy. It's a fabulous 4-point checklist, but it's not quite super simple to do, really. And I shouldn't say that. I guess it's not that hard to do. It's the keeping track of it all.
Yes, yes. And some people just aren't, set up that way, right? Some people just want to be creative and they don't want to keep track of all this so-called paperwork, which is fine. But if that's you, you have to either have a budget to hire a staff to basically do these things for you, and you want to make sure it's people you trust, or you're going to have to try to sign with a label and with a publisher to take care of all of these things for you, in which case they're going to take a large percentage of everything to provide those services.
Yes, and they're definitely earning their money.
Yes.
Was there anything else with the checklist or anything outside of that?
No, that's really it. So I guess to kind of circle back to the original question that came from Patrick, if you want to sort of win at the independent game, you want to make sure that you have set up this foundation that we discussed today, and that'll really get you set up well from a legal and a business perspective. And then the rest of it really just comes down to marketing and promotion, which again, it's not my area of expertise, so I won't speak too much on that, but that would be the second half of things as far as what you need to take care of as an independent artist. And that sometimes can be the most difficult part, because it can get very, very expensive to market things. And you want to make sure it's done the right way. So once you've set up this business and legal foundation, then you can focus on the marketing and promotion, and putting the music out.
That's a big one right there, for sure. Well, we thank Patrick for his question, and it was a great question. This is a great time because you are an attorney and you can help with most of the stuff that we just outlined. So tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, so that if they need help, they know who to go to.
Sure. Yep. So the easiest way would be to go to my website, and then from there you can find all my other contact information. And the website is cspanglermusiclaw.com. That's CSPANGLER musiclaw.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on and helping us out with this music industry stuff.
Thank you, Janae, for having me. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully people out there listening will find the information helpful, and feel free to reach out to us, if you have any other questions.
Absolutely.